Here we go again. There's an article out today from Reuters about a new round of possible U.S. intervention. Quote, President Obama, under pressure from some lawmakers to provide more help to Syria's opposition, asked Congress on Thursday to approve $500 million to train and equip moderate Syrian rebels seeking to oust President Bashar al-Assad. Excuse me. They say a White House statement said Syrian rebels would be appropriately vetted, that's a quote, appropriately vetted before being given assistance in what amounts to an effort to assuage, I love that word, concerns that some equipment provided to the Syrian opposition might ultimately fall into the hands of U.S. enemies. So, we've seen this storyline unfold about 13 other times in American history, and it never ends well. I can't tell you how many times I've brought up the example on the show of President Reagan arming the Mujahideen in the 1980s when they were fighting a war against the Soviet Union. See, that's what America does. We're very nitpicky and cliquish. So whenever we hate somebody, like we hated the Soviet Union back then, the idea was, well, we should just fund anybody who also hates the Soviet Union because the enemy of my enemy is my friend. So the Soviet Union was, of course, fighting a war in Afghanistan. So we funded and armed the Mujahideen, and they were our allies. And then the Mujahideen later on broke up into two little-known groups. Maybe you heard of them, maybe you didn't. They're called the Taliban and Al-Qaeda. So you know how there's every once in a while you see some video from the Middle East and these Al-Qaeda fighters, these jihadists, seem to be holding American-made weapons? Yeah, we gave it to them. It's not like they invaded a factory in Kentucky and ran out the back door with some automatic weapons. No, we handed it to them. Because at one time we thought, well, we can obviously tame these people. They're on our side anyway because they're fighting the Soviet Union. So the same idea is going into play now with Syria. Now, keep in mind, I'm going to get to some criticisms of what I'm saying here in a second, and I'm going to respond to them. But if you go by the polls, there's a Reuters Ipsos poll that found that only 9% of Americans want to intervene in Syria. So in my book, that's the end of the conversation right there. I mean, it's already the end of the conversation because I'm a non-interventionist in the sense that I believe the only time the U.S. should use the military is if there's a threat of imminent attack against the nation, and the overwhelming majority of the American people agree with me on that. So even just from a principled perspective, I'm not having this conversation, but when 9% of the American people, that's it, say, okay, yes, let's militarily intervene in Syria, well then, if we even want to pretend like we have a representative democracy anymore, this debate should be long gone. It should have been done a long time ago. But also, 60% of Americans oppose any form of intervention at all. That includes humanitarian aid, that includes any kind of arming. And so now let's address some a criticism of what I'm saying here. Now, in recent times, there were some people who reached out to me on Twitter, and they were talking to me about the situation in Syria. Some people are actually, from Syria, or they're actually on the ground in Syria. There were some journalists involved with the situation, and we were going back and forth quite a bit. And it appears to me that the FSA, which is the Free Syrian Army, they are one of the many rebel factions that are fighting against Bashar al-Assad. The FSA is the most legitimate of all of the different rebel groups in the sense that I truly believe that the people in the FSA, they're largely secular, and all they want to do is take back their country from what they view as a dictator. And, there's certainly a great argument that he's been a humanitarian disaster. He's done quite a bit of mass killings and a lot of terrible actions. So the FSA, I view them, they are a legitimate opposition force. They are the legitimate rebels. And make no mistake about it, when President Obama is talking about, well, I want to send help to the rebels, that's who he's talking about. He's talking about giving money and weapons and helping out the FSA. Now, with that being said, the people fighting alongside the FSA, because they also want to get rid of Assad, because Assad is an Alawite, which is an offshoot of Shiite Islam. They are jihadists, Sunni jihadists, including Al-Nusra Front. That's a group that's officially linked with Al-Qaeda. And yes, ISIS. There's this theory going on around out there where people say, actually, ISIS is fighting on the side of Bashar Assad. I don't buy that for a second. I don't buy that for a second. All the evidence says that ISIS, other than just going all the way through Iraq and running roughshod and trying to reach Baghdad and taking Mosul and all these places, ISIS, they are also fighting Assad. And in fact, there were, fucking really scary. There was somebody on Twitter who is an actual member of ISIS who somehow got involved in the conversation where I was going back and forth with the FSA people. And he was like, no, yeah, we're fighting Assad too. I was like, whoa, is this really an ISIS guy? This is the scariest fucking moment of my life. There's a guy who's like, who may have beheaded people who's talking to me on Twitter. Isn't technology amazing? But, so the concern is, even if, we have isolated the secular good people in the Free Syrian Army. I don't doubt that there are many secular good people in the Free Syrian Army. But the problem is, every once in a while, there's going to be one who's not. And then what happens? There are already reports that some of the arms and some of the help that's gone to the FSA, it somehow leaked through and got to Hezbollah, who's fighting on the side of Assad. So the weapons aren't going where we want them to go. The help doesn't necessarily go where we want it to go. And of course, another concern, and there was somebody on Chris Hayes' show on MSNBC the other night, they said, some of the help that went to the FSA, some people in the FSA, they would turn around and then sell it to ISIS and sell it to al-Nusra Front and sell it to these jihadists. So that's the concern, man. The concern is, let's say everything goes perfect, okay? So we fund the FSA, we're able to actually get the secular rebels, and we know which ones are good people and just fighting to try to get their country back from Assad, right? And then let's say they topple Assad. Then what happens? Then you have some people in the rebel movement that are in the FSA and mean well and they're secular. But you also have this massive power vacuum, and you have people from al-Nusra Front and people from ISIS, and even the Kurds. The Kurds are also part of the rebel movement. Now, they're largely staying in their own area, essentially fighting for their own region, right? Like the same thing which is happening in Iraq. But you have this massive power vacuum and all these different factions, and then it becomes a war within the war. And by the way, there's already a war within the war, because there are some people in FSA that are fighting people in ISIS and fighting people in al-Nusra. So there's a war within a war within a war. And look, the bottom line is, what business is it of the United States of America anyway? Look, let me be clear, man. I have no problem with, there were some people that were saying, well, all the FSA wants is for President Obama to not block other American allies from giving the FSA weapons. Okay, fine. I'm fine with that. If I was the president, I wouldn't block people from funding the FSA if they wanted to, but I wouldn't have the United States of America do it. Here's what I would have the United States of America do. Fuck off. Mind our fucking business, because every time we get involved around the world, we always fuck it up. We always make it worse, you know? And what were we going to do? Seriously? So we arm the FSA. We end up helping the FSA, but the FSA is also fighting against a common enemy with ISIS. So we would be helping the FSA in Syria, but then we'd be fighting ISIS in Iraq, because that's another thing we want to do. I mean, we have people who are both allies and enemies that we're funding and arming and doing all these crazy things in the Middle East. No, the bottom line is we should mind our business. Only 9% of Americans want to get involved, which means 91% of Americans are exactly right on this issue, and the president shouldn't even consider it, and Congress shouldn't even consider it.